Hello again, everybody. I am Christian Garman with the University of West Florida's Innovation Institute, and with me once again, Dr. Bill Huth, distinguished university professor in the discipline of economics. Dr. Huth, thank you again. Good to have you sitting here with me. I appreciate it. Loved our lionfish discussion. Next up, we're talking about artificial reefs. I think we all know what artificial reefs are. Maybe the most notable one, certainly to me, I'm not a diver, I've never done it before, is the Oriskany. I remember, I worked, of course, at WEAR TV for many years, and I remember the day that they were sinking the Oriskany, and we had a boat out there live, and we took it live and watched it go down, and this was a big deal. Is that one, the Oriskany, the most noteworthy in the Gulf?
Well, I'd say so, yes. It's the biggest artificial reef that exists, and this is, interestingly, its 10-year anniversary. Hate to age you so.
I was thinking, really? Feels like a week ago.
It's now been down 10 years, but Florida has probably the most extensive artificial reef program in the U.S. We have probably well over 3,000 artificial reefs. Not all of them are big ships like the Oriskany, but we have several big ships. And their attraction is more diving than basically providing habitat for fish, but they do that anyways. And the Spiegel Grove was the first one that went down off of Key West, and then there's the Vandenberg the Spiegel Grove was Key Largo. The Vandenberg went down off of Key West, the Mohawk's off of Tampa, and the Oriskany is, of course, off Pensacola. The Lulu just got sunk, named after Jimmy Buffett's sister. It's off of Alabama. And so that Alabama also has an artificial reef program. But I was charged by Florida Fish and Wildlife about 3 years ago now to measure the economic value of artificial reefs to Florida. And we just looked at it from fishing and diving, and we found that the Florida artificial reef system contributes annually, it's about $3 billion of economic impact.
$3 billion from the reefs alone?
Yes, in terms
wow.
of just saltwater fishing and diving. And they provide about 39,000 jobs, and they also produce about $250 million of revenue to the state of Florida every year.
Incredible.
So they're really a great investment, in Florida. And one of the interesting things we found, in order to determine that, we sampled, to the 1.2 million Florida saltwater fishing license holders, and we found that of those, there were approximately 200,000 from out of state, and we wondered why that was the case. And it turns out those are Florida's best visitors. Those are people that own property here. They come, instead of staying in a motel, they buy a vacation home. Wow. They leave their boats here, and they come here to saltwater fish. And so the economic impact from those people is the largest because they're bringing dollars from outside in. In addition to that $3 billion, we also found a value to Floridians from those reefs of about $700 million more. So it's nearly a $4 billion total economic value. That's of about $23 billion or so that really the Gulf contributes, or that Florida contributes to U.S. GDP from the Gulf.
And you mentioned these very notable large-scale artificial reefs. Right. But I'm assuming there are so many more. I mean, I remember growing up as a kid, I would have buddies who would make their own little artificial reefs on a very small scale.
Indeed. Well, they used to throw tires in the water, right. So to an extent, early on, artificial reefs were almost sea fills, like a landfill, if you will. People looked at it as a way to get rid of stuff. And we dump a lot of bridge rubble, but we also put very interesting things down, like the Oriskany. The Joe Patty Reef went down here recently, which was a barge where they basically had customized sculptures built on it. And it's really an interesting site because it's just a fish haven now if you visit it. And there's all sorts of interesting things, like you can sit on a bar stool at the Floribama, underneath the
That's pretty cool.
In a cloud of fish. Yeah.
Do they actually serve drinks?
No, they don't.
Oh. Well, water, Gulf, salt water.
You can have some salt water if you want. But reefs are actually a very important component to fishery management. I was just up in Washington about 4 months ago for the National Artificial Reef Workshop in terms of how it's best to incorporate artificial reefs into the fishery management process. Up to this point, they've not really been considered. And the conclusion reached there was that they should be an integral part of reef management or fishery management because they do provide habitat for valuable fish like gag grouper, snapper, etc.
So that's interesting because the last question I'll ask you goes the other way. You told us about how much money they bring in, how they can actually help fish. Is there any sort of a downside, an environmental threat? I mean, you mentioned maybe not with the Oriskany, but people throwing tires in the...
Even the Oriskany, so when the Oriskany was sunk, of course the Oriskany was one of the oldest ships that's been sunk as an artificial reef. And as an old ship, they were unable to clean all of the wire out of it. And a lot of that wire contained encapsulated PCBs. And so Florida Fish and Wildlife, so they had to get a variance from EPA. That's one of the reasons it took so long to sink it. So Florida Fish and Wildlife has been sampling fish, off of the Oriskany, for the past decade. And they have found a bit of an uptake in PCBs in fish tissue. But the question is that because of the Oriskany, or are they pelagic fish that are picking it somewhere else and then coming to the Oriskany? So there's not a clear-cut causal connection between that.
And the last thing I'll ask you on the topic of artificial reefs, I'm sure you've gone down on a lot of them. Which one is your favorite?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Yeah?
That's a tough question.
Do they all have their own special?
Yes, they do. But the Oriskany, given its depth, when it was originally sunk, the deck was at 130 feet. Now Hurricane Gustav rocked it.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
I think it was DeSoto Canyon, and as you look at the circulation pattern out of a hurricane, there was a surge up DeSoto Canyon in the Gulf, and that rocked the Oriskany, and it went about 10 to 15 feet deeper everywhere. But that was a 20% reduction in economic value simply because now it's more difficult for recreational divers to hit it. But still, in terms of the immensity of it, it's an awesome dive. And the volume of fish that you see, I have a friend, Scott Bartell, who does a lot of video work. He actually videoed the sinking of the Oriskany for National Geographic when it was first sunk. And he's got just a beautiful picture of a manta ray with probably a 20-foot wingspan, flying around the island, of the Oriskany, and it's just beautiful. You can't. It's really nice. Yeah,
that sounds pretty incredible. What an interesting topic. As I told you before we started recording, I don't know much about artificial reefs.
You should learn to dive.
I think you're right. You're not the only person who's told me that. But thank you for talking about it, and hopefully you guys learned as much just now as I did.